And good afternoon, everyone. We're back in Culture Shock like every week, every Wednesday at 1 p.m. And here we are with the hosts, Nathaniel, Karen, myself, and we have a very special guest today, Professor Alexa. And, well, as you could see on the presentation of this week, we have two different topics that we're going to talk about today. And those topics are, Nathaniel?
We have the 4th of July, which is today, and the Independence Day in the United States, and we also have Canada Day, which was over the past weekend, which is the 1st of July.
That was Sunday, right?
Yeah. That was Sunday, yeah. And in fact, the week before was quote unquote national holiday in Quebec, which is of course part of Canada, but known as Saint Jean Baptiste, and so we'll talk a little bit about that as well.
Cool.
But we may as well start with the day that it is today.
Yeah,
the 4th
today
of July.
is 4th of July. As we know, it's a very important day in the United States. It's the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And we will be giving more details. But first, let's meet our new guest. Well, can you please tell us, Alexa, a little bit about yourself? You have a very interesting background. So tell us about that.
Hi, and thank you for inviting me today. I'm working here at the Duck Department. My name is Alexa Guzman, and I was actually born in the United States. I was born in Columbus, Ohio, but my dad was from Mexico City, so he decided he wanted to live in Puebla, so he brought me as a baby here. So I basically grew up half the time in Puebla and the other half in the state of Minnesota because my mom is from Minnesota.
Okay.
So definitely a lot of farmland, a lot of beautiful farms, and definitely a lot of cows and corn.
And what, if I can ask, what parts of the year did you spend in Mexico, and what parts did you spend in Minnesota? Because the climate can be pretty harsh up there.
Oh, it's very extreme, definitely. The state of Minnesota is quite extreme because during the summer, it's very, very hot and humid, and during winter, it's very, very cold and humid. And so last week, they had a weather warning for 114 degrees Fahrenheit with 70% humidity. So it's extremely hot.
Yeah,
and it can get up to minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit in the winter.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's tremendous.
So you experienced the whole...
Yeah, I've been there, during the summer, the winter.
Summer,
Fall is absolutely beautiful because you have the coloring of the leaves and they fall, and it's just a lot of fun. So, yeah, I've been there. I've lived there for the entire year.
Okay.
How much snow can you get there?
Oh, it can be quite, maybe in meters, up to 2.5 meters of snow.
Holy cow.
I mean, but you have to remember that this is like November, December, January, February, March. It's the 15th of April, and like, when is this going to disappear? It's not fun anymore.
No, I'm from Vermont, and it doesn't get quite as hot there in the summer, and we don't get quite as much snow. But winter, the joke is that, there is... 9 months of winter and 3 months of summer, and spring is like that.
Okay, can I go ahead and tell a joke about the state of Minnesota?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, there's this farmer. Remember, the state of Minnesota has a lot of farms, and it was very famous for dairy for many years. And so this farmer, who's not a very good farmer, dies and goes to hell. And so the devil receives him and says, well, what do you think about hell? And he said, well, it's hot. Like a June day in Minnesota. And so the devil gets really angry. So he goes and cranks up the heater, and it's like incredibly hot. And he says, what do you think about it now? Like an August day in Minnesota. So the devil gets really, really angry. So he turns everything off and freezes over hell and says, well, what do you think about it now? A January day in Minnesota.
Because you have both extremes, right?
Extremes,
Yeah,
yes.
you have that. That's cool.
And so to focus on the 4th of July, you were telling us before the show that there are some unique, there are parades all over the United States, but there's some pretty unique traditions in Minnesota, where you're from.
Yeah, definitely the fireworks in the evening are always important. Besides, every little town, every township has different, let us say, amount of money designated for fireworks. So there are certain towns that are very, very famous for their very good firework display. But most definitely the highlight would be the tractor parade. Okay, remember, again, Minnesota is a state of farming, and so farmers are very proud of their equipment. It's very, very important. And so, I mean, people like my grandpa would pull out the old tractors, you know, they go the put, 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 make all the big sound. And you have to almost crank them. And then obviously the younger generations bring out their very sophisticated, very large, fancy tractors and combines and everything in between. And so this year, the parade between the two churches that, you know, are part of the community was about 15 miles of 100 tractors. Wow. So you can imagine the sight. It must have been really, it was really fun. And everybody participates, grandpa and grandma and the kids and the grandkids. Everybody's like in the tractors, on the tractors all over. And people come out to see them parade.
And is this exclusively for tractors? There's nothing else but tractors?
Well, tractors and combine and equipment, farm equipment.
Okay, cool. But there's no
basically
like these
tractors.
big balloons or those things are not part of it?
Part of the parade is you throw candy.
Okay.
So, I mean, as the tractors are going by, you have buckets of candy and you throw candy to the people, you know, that are watching.
Sounds like Mardi Gras.
Yeah. So it's fun because then the kids are really happy because they get this big bucket. I mean, there's no piñatas, but they have 4th of July candy.
Okay.
So
it's like fun. A Halloween reloaded,
it's
right?
Actually, it's pretty fun.
To get you through the summer.
And people just go there, get the candy, and it's about seeing the tractors.
Yeah, it's about seeing the tractors.
Is there food also? Is there?
Well, no, because you go home and then have a picnic. And so remember, today's like National Picnic Day. And so hamburgers and hot dogs, definitely potato salad. I know that's on my mom's list. And she's making cherry pie this year, so that's exciting. I love cherry pie.
Is how legal is it to buy fireworks in the States?
It depends upon the state. Okay, so for example, the state of Minnesota was illegal until about 3 years ago because, you know, guess what? You can tax this. So it's really good, you know, good when it comes to taxing. So now it's legal in the state of Minnesota. Okay. So because they used to go over the bridge to Wisconsin, and Wisconsin would get all the taxes, and that's not very good.
But so you would get it there legally?
Yeah, now you can buy them. Yeah. I mean, like here we have like the stands here, like outside, like the Walmart where you have like Halloween outfits. Well, now you have a stand outside the Walmart that has fireworks. Nice. So now it's legal. Yeah.
Different from Mexico, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, I grew up in Chiapas, and you know, like the border with Guatemala was very close, like 2 hours, 2.5 hours. And we would go there, buy the fireworks because it wasn't legal there, then bring them home. But if you were unlucky, these migration officers
check you at the border.
could check you
and take away all the fireworks.
Yeah, take away all the fireworks. But we were lucky enough to have a neighbor who was an immigrant officer.
Oh, that influence.
Yeah, so we would just leave our bags there because they were like big bags. We would spend probably sometimes even like 4,000, 5,000 pesos on fireworks.
Wow.
And he would bring them home, and then he's like, "Oh, here are your fireworks." So it was all fun.
Better than candy.
Yeah, better than for us. It was a tradition for many years until we grew up and we outgrew the firework mania, right? Yeah. But yeah, that was very fun. Did you ever have an accident with this?
In the U.S., in the U.S., they're very, very strict about this kind of thing. So you have to be real careful about it. In Mexico, I had an accident. Sometime I'll tell you that story.
Okay. What about you guys? Have you ever played with fireworks, and have you ever had an accident?
I don't really like it. I'm scared of those things.
Okay. Yes. And what about you?
We just little ones that nothing. I mean, more like firecrackers. The ones that make noise, not the ones that shoot up in the air and make the lights. But yeah, we have growing up in Vermont, which is also on the Canadian border, but the northeast rather than the central area of the country in the United States. My grandparents had a summer house on the lake, and me and my cousins and my aunts and uncles and everybody would gather there, and there was a little a beach area, and we'd always have a big bonfire. Or 4th of July, or just general sort of summer activities, but 4th of July, potato salad. When you said that,
definitely potato salad.
I'm thinking of potato salad, and my mom's potato salad is excellent. And
I think potato salad would be like the Mexican equivalent of ensalada rusa. I mean, whenever you have a party, you need to have potato salad.
Is it like coleslaw or no?
No, potatoes and eggs, mayo,
potatoes, eggs, mayo,
salt, pepper,
sometimes tomatoes, cucumbers,
celery.
Yeah, different people.
Yeah, depending
variations.
But basically potatoes and eggs.
basically.
exactly.
Okay.
But yeah,
wow.
we used to, all that kind of food. But we used to be on the beach and be swimming, but at night to build a big bonfire and to toast marshmallows.
Yeah,
right? And to
definitely.
make
S'mores.
S'mores. Yeah. Do you know what s'mores are?
No.
Okay,
No.
so you take graham crackers, right?
Uh-huh.
Equivalent to like a Maria cookie.
Yeah.
And marshmallows, and you
And
put
chocolate. You're missing the most important part.
Yeah, the most important part.
Chocolate, yeah.
The chocolate and the marshmallows. You put the marshmallows in the fire. You get them nice and melty, right? And then when you put it on the cracker with the chocolate, it melts
Like
the
a
chocolate a
sandwich.
little
Yeah,
bit.
it's
It's like a
like
candy chocolate
marshmallow
sandwich.
chocolate sandwich. Yeah,
Sounds
it's pretty
good.
good. Yeah, oh, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
So we would do that, and
Yeah.
sometimes firecrackers. But no, my grandfather didn't really care.
How
for
about
those.
pie? Did your mom make pie? Your grandma make pie?
So I see. I when I was growing up, I always thought my mom didn't make pies. She just started making pies a few years ago with my niece, her granddaughter. But my aunt always made pies, and my grandmother would sometimes make pies. But there was also a really good orchard, an apple orchard, and they also had blueberries and strawberries near their house. And so we would sometimes pick the fruit, but also they would make pies, and sometimes we'd just buy them from the.
I never really
But
felt
they're-
attracted
yeah.
by
No,
pumpkin
pie.
pie.
No.
Well, that's a
Summer.
different
That's
season.
that's a
That's
different
so
time of
different.
year.
That's
This
fall,
is summer.
yeah. Summer, but cherry is
Yeah,
classic.
yeah.
We
You
all-
know, my total favorite, absolute top of the line, blueberry peach pie. Oh
very good.
man,
Sounds
See,
fancy.
I always liked
Oh.
strawberry rhubarb.
my mom likes rhubarb.
Yeah, I don't think they have rhubarb.
Rhubarb,
here.
it's
They're
like
sort of
celery, como apio,
Yeah.
but
Right.
more of a pink color. It's like it's sweet and sour.
Yeah.
You need to kind of
Yeah, I
acquire
don't
the
think we do
taste.
have that.
But you mix it with strawberries and a pie, and that's summer.
Sweet and
summer on a
tart.
plate. Right there.
Yeah.
And before we go to a break, Alexa, what's your favorite part, or what has been your favorite 4th of July celebration? Why? Tell us.
Well, let's see. I guess it was always really fun with my grandpa
Mm-hmm.
because there's one thing that's also very important is that during the summer we have something that's called a demolition derby because we have the county fair.
Okay.
And so demolition derby means that they take these old cars, seal them up, take away all the basic stuff from the motor, and you crash the cars. So 4th of July and my grandpa taking me to a demo derby was the best thing in the
thing.
world.
Wow. And who drives those cars? Just crazy people?
Crazy people, crazy farmers.
But they know how to
I
Was there
wish
accidents
I wish
there?
I could have driven in one.
Would you
Yeah.
do it now?
No. I got back problems and I think it would be bad.
that's a good
But I
enough
wish
reason.
sometime I really wish I could have done that.
Well, Alexa, thank you very much for being here with us today. And we really appreciate you sharing this because we know how the celebration is in some parts, but these very specific, unique towns, who have their own way of celebrating. It's very interesting to get to know that. I think.
It's fun. It's a lot of fun. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's been
Oh,
a pleasure to be
you're very
here.
happy.
Now I want to go get some pie.
Okay, we'll be back in a few minutes and keep on listening.
NutriTips informa. Para tener un buen cuidado de tus alimentos en el hogar es necesario que, cuando quieras desinfectar tus verduras o frutas, primero límpialas bajo el chorro de agua, después remójalas en algún desinfectante como es el bicarbonato, pon una cucharada por 1 litro de agua o bien con cloro, que son 5 gotas por litro de agua. Cuando quieras hervir tus verduras, pon a hervir agua y cuando esté burbujeando, coloca las verduras desinfectadas y déjalas por periodos cortos de tiempo. No más de 5 minutos para que no pierdan sus propiedades. Es importante mantener las superficies de la cocina limpias. Para esto, puedes utilizar bicarbonato y limón o detergentes especializados para cada superficie. Recuerda, no hay mejor inversión que una buena alimentación.
Natural está de vuelta. No te pierdas todos los martes en punto de las 13 horas tu programa BIOS. Con nuevas secciones, entrevistas enlaces telefónicos, transmisiones en vivo y mucho más. BIOS, el sonido de lo natural está de vuelta. No te lo pierdas, todos los martes en punto de las 13 horas.
What have you heard about Mexico these days? We are the best hosts. Every year, over 23 million tourists visit Mexico. And even better, 80% of them always come back. We're green. First place in natural protected areas. Jacques Cousteau named the Sea of Cortez the aquarium of the world. Classy. 2 of the 30 best restaurants in the world are in Mexico City. And it's all happening in Mexico as we speak. Find out for yourself.
Okay, we're back after having this amazing conversation, but now we have some historical significance of this day. So, is the 4th of July is a national holiday in the States, but it celebrates the Declaration of Independence. And well, the 13 colonies finally were states. And something important is that the settlers, and the British Empire had a good relationship.
Up to that point, right?
Up to that point, yeah. But then Britain started to increment taxes and laws started to change and being different. And, well, British start to have financial problems. So that's why they increment the taxes. And, well, they start, like, growing this sense of nationalism and identity.
Yeah, that's, I think, 2 things that got together, right?
Yeah.
Imposing more and more taxes.
Right.
There's the Sugar Act, I think. Yes.
Yep.
And then there's a point in which these people are being now born on this side of the world, and they start feeling this pride of being here, right? Which I think happens in every
I think
part of history when there's an empire or a country that conquers other. These new people who are being like what happened here, right? In Mexico. So and all of this is getting together.
Also in the La Gran Colombia, right, and the revolution in revolutions in South America, the sense that
it's that sense.
Who are we, right? Who
exactly.
we thought we were
born
Spanish
here. We're not Spanish because we're
and even if some of those who were born in the colonies claimed that they were Spanish, the people in Spain wouldn't see them as such. No, you were born there. You're not. You may have Spanish blood, but you're not actually Spanish.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
So
all of these, I think, it's part of all the factors that get together
but politically as well.
Yeah, politically, and I think that's one of the most important things that the research mentioned. That at some point they said, okay, we're paying taxes. They're like all their laws apply to us, but we don't have any representation.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
So that's
the famous call, the famous rallying cry, right? No taxation without representation.
Exactly. That's I remember exactly the words for the
and it's funny too. I mean, and that question is still somewhat ironically still a question in the contemporary United States. Washington D.C., the capital city, right, is not a state, right?
Yeah.
It's like DF, the District of Columbia, right? And so it's technically not a state. So while it has a mayor and it has its own municipal government, as any city would, it does not have any representatives in Congress or any senators, right? So on the license plate on cars from Washington, registered in Washington, D.C., with a Washington, D.C. license plate, says taxation without representation, because of course the citizens of Washington D.C. pay taxes, but they have no representation in the national government.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it's on their license plates, and and to think that is the capital city of the United States, where.
And I think that's very interesting because I knew they weren't considered a state, but I didn't know how would that affect politically and economically.
And so in a certain way, it's similar to say Puerto Rico, right? So Puerto Rico has observers in the Houses of Congress, but no voting power, right? But I mean, they're not a a district, they're a commonwealth or a territory or whatever you call it. But a similar question for, or in the United States Virgin Islands or American Samoa and these other areas. Anyway, that's a little bit off topic, but these things are still questions today about representation in government and politics and
that's where it all started, right? And I was, as we were saying, in Mexico, the same happened, right? Like Spanish came, they conquered, and now the Spanish who were born here, they were like, I'm not Spanish, I'm not from here, what am I? And then all these nationalism things.
And identity,
like,
right?
Identity.
I think was
yes.
the main part of all of this, no? Identity.
Exactly.
I'm from here, not from there.
And the same thing, they had no representation.
And imagine in that era, right? I mean,
Yes.
for news to travel from the government in Spain to Mexico City, Tenochtitlan, right?
Yeah.
How long does it take for the laws to get to cross the ocean and then to across the land and to finally arrive
Exactly,
into the
because
Valley of
there was not even
Right,
like telegraph or those.
Right,
no,
of course
nothing.
not.
Yes, and I think that's interesting because I was I like science fiction. And I've seen in books and everything, and this is the theory that many of these people who write or create games or make movies present, that is at some point we are able to go to space and colonize other planets. The same thing is going to happen. At some point, people in those planets are not going to feel Earthlings anymore, right? Like they will feel like they are Martians or they are from Jupiter, and they will want their independence from
history
Earth's
will
government.
find a way to repeat itself in some
Yeah,
way or
and
another.
Earth will be
in
very
outer space.
attached to that, right? So I think that will I'm a true believer of if we're able to colonize, that will happen at some point.
But to get back to the history, right?
Yes.
I mean, the Declaration of Independence and famous names such as Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, right?
Yep.
But as Karen mentioned, that these 13 colonies declared themselves independent from Great Britain and declared themselves as being a confederation or a conglomeration of states, right? Independent states
And
that would be united in a new country or nation.
Back then, only 13 states, right?
And it wasn't an easy process, right? So there was the war, the Revolutionary War against Great Britain, but also
a very hard to document process, right? Because there are many doubts, myths of what happened, what didn't.
Yeah.
And that's what the next part is about. We have some conceptions and misconceptions of the 4th of July celebration. And the first one is that, according to our research, it was not on the 4th of July, but it was actually on July 2nd. But it wasn't signed on that day. In fact, it takes until up to August the 2nd of that year of 1776 when the signing began. So I think that's very interesting because, like it was planned to be on the 2nd, but then because of the way it was written and the time it took to get all fixed up, then they said
right.
the
And
4th.
then after that, the actual Constitution wouldn't be ratified until the 1780s, right?
Yeah.
And all the very famous. I mean, if you're interested in U.S. history, a very famous sequence and series of debates that took years to figure out exactly how they wanted to structure the government.
Exactly.
But
Also, another one of the very interesting misconceptions, as I guess it happened in any revolution, is that, as we know, people never agree on everything, right? People never completely agree on something with all the population. So not all the British army was composed mainly by British. They also had people who had been born on the new colonies on their side, and that was part of the conflict, right? Like, why would you fight for them? We have an estimate that probably 15 to 20% of all Americans, what now would be considered Americans, were loyalists to the British Empire. So I think that's a very interesting thing, and linked to this is also that not all people wanted to sign and fight. They do in history, as always, we decorate our history, and we want to make believe that people were eager to be free and people were eager to fight for that freedom. And at the beginning, that was true. People were enlisting and they wanted to fight. But at some point when they saw it wasn't not just going to be like 1 month or a 2-day conflict, it started getting difficult for their farms, their families, and people started like backing away from enlisting, you know? And so the government had to start like, well, the people who were behind the revolution wanted to offer money for the enlisting, as well as the British Empire for the ones who wanted to join the British Army. They're starting to offer money, to offer bribing and everything for people to join. And I think that's a very interesting part of the reality of a war, right? There's some point in which people say, okay, I fought, but this is not going to end. I don't see the end of this. I'm just not going to fight anymore.
Especially because the British Empire was really strong, really big, and
yes, it was a lopsided fight.
Exactly, yes, because he was one of the biggest armies there, right? Especially the naval part, right? It was the
I don't remember too many specifics about Revolutionary War history, but
and well, my favorite one is because many people believe what we see in movies.
National Treasure.
I remember I was super young when I watched this Nicolas Cage movie, right? And well, he finds secrets in everything, in the dollar bill, in the Constitution, in everything, and secret messages that lead them to treasures and whatever, right? So this is not true. There's no secret hidden on the Declaration of Independence, though there is something written on the back, okay? And that's mainly because those papers were usually rolled up, and in the back it had a legend that says Original Declaration of Independence dated 4th July 1776. And that's just mainly because it was always rolled, so you could see in the back that it said the Declaration of Independence, just to identify.
That I did not know before today.
But Nicolas Cage just lied to us, right?
No, but it's a great movie. There's National Treasure and then National Treasure 2. Yeah,
I know.
Which
I watched.
I'm a fan. I think they're great. I like Nicolas Cage.
I feel really drunk because I haven't watched it.
You haven't watched
it? They were classics.
Oh, you gotta watch
it. Just spoiled the movie.
Well, not really, because it's very funny if you watch it. Well, just don't believe him, right?
Okay.
It's not based in fact. It's not based in fact, but it is fun. It is fun.
Well, there has always been this myth, right, of not only by Nicolas Cage, but like that he was like one of the main things on the movie. But there's always on the dollar bill, like I've heard there's something secret.
There's Masonic symbols.
The Masonic,
all that
or
kind of stuff.
What's the name of the other? The Illuminati or whatever.
Oh, who knows
those
that?
things. But no. Then the Declaration of Independence, yes, there is something written on the back, but no secret passages or maps or whatever. Good.
And so that, if we think about it in the context of world history, right? In the age of revolutions, right? In the age of Enlightenment, ending in the age of revolutions, so 1770s, right? And then we have revolutions all over the New World, which we sort of alluded to, and whether it's
because Mexico's independance is after this,
right? 1820s,
50
right?
years, 40 years after this.
The Haitian Revolution, and of course, the early 1800s, all across the Western Hemisphere, right? And we will, when we get back from a break, we'll talk about Canada Day, which is Canada is still technically what's the term? Anyway, we'll get to it. But they're still affiliated technically under the British Crown, but they are independent. They have Canada Day was a federation, and where they broke apart from the United Kingdom, but
right?
Well, and why the Queen is still on their money, right? Yeah. Queen Elizabeth, her face is still on their $20 bill, and anyway, so now, but to get back, just a quick final note on July 4th, right? As we mentioned, a lot of parades, a lot of fireworks, a lot of barbecues and picnics.
A lot of pride.
Both local hometown pride, as our guest mentioned, but also national pride, and these are questions I think any country deals with, right? What is the difference between?
And I consider it's probably because of what we've been saying, that's probably one of the biggest celebrations in the States after probably Thanksgiving, and I don't know about Christmas. but it's probably just between those three, right?
Yeah, but I mean, insofar as a national holiday, and
Yep.
so far as a secular holiday,
It's non-secular, right? It's non-secular?
it's a state holiday. It has nothing to do with religious celebrations. I mean, churches obviously partake in the parades and everything, but the question between what I was going to bring up is the idea of patriotism, which is and nationalism, and especially in today's climates, right? The political climates, both in Europe, in Mexico, in the United States,
and
everywhere.
I think everywhere now is,
Yeah.
there's a lot of things happening around the world.
Right.
And before we go to a break, I would like to read this part, which is a very famous part of the Constitution of the United States.
Declaration of Independence. No.
Declaration, sorry, of Independence, where it says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights from alien, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." And I think that applies not only to the United States, but that's something we should all follow, right? All men are created equal. And I think not only the States, but Mexico, but many other countries, we are forgetting that.
Yeah, and I think it's. Yeah, I mean, if we think of the significance in the United States in that moment of history and these words, and while they may have not included everybody at that time, I mean, slavery, and there are some very serious questions to ask about some of the founding fathers of the United States. But the ideals that they tried to codify into the Declaration of Independence and later the Constitution, yeah, I mean, however we feel about the United States in contemporary times, I mean, there are some. It does have a role to play in history, and
of course it does.
How that gets balanced, right, and how people feel about that is obviously a contentious point. We don't need to get into that, but there is. Anyway, yeah, it's.
I mean, the words sound nice.
Right.
I think we.
But
just
I think they also have
forgotten,
a lot
right?
of. Yeah. Like you said, to keep them in the back of our minds sometimes.
Yes.
But yeah, it's a strange experience being here. I keep forgetting that it's the 4th of July.
Yeah, it's probably.
Because all of my friends back home are on vacation, and I'm working. That's fine.
Okay, so let's go to a break. We come back, and we'll talk about Canada.
NutriTips informa. ¿Estás embarazada? No descuides tu alimentación, ya que tienes que cubrir tus necesidades y las de tu bebé. El que tengas que alimentarte por los dos no quiere decir que puedes comer el doble de lo que comías, solo lo necesario, que es aproximadamente 300 kilocalorías extras a tu dieta. No se te olvide consumir calcio, hierro, ácido fólico y también vitaminas como la A, C y B en alimentos como verduras, cereales, carnes y lácteos. Evita totalmente el consumo de alcohol, café, té o refrescos. Acude con un especialista para que te dé los suplementos que necesitas. Recuerda, no hay mejor inversión que una buena alimentación.
Okay, we're back, and now it's the turn of Canada.
Yeah, so we can't. We can't forget that just this past Sunday, just north of the United States, was Canada Day, July 1st, and it commemorates the joining of Canada's 3 original provinces: Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and the province of Canada, which was split into 2 parts. There was Upper Canada and Lower Canada. Upper Canada is now known as Ontario. Lower Canada is what we now call Quebec. And that was in 1867, right? So it was technically a I'm missing something here.
Dominion of the British Empire.
Yes. So it was so the Federation of Canada commemorates that when Canada
Came together.
yes came together as apart from the United Kingdom, right? Canada is still a member of the Commonwealth of Nations, right? Former colonies controlled by the British Empire, but Canada is technically a federal parliamentary constitutional monarchy. So technically, the official head of Canada is the Queen of England, Elizabeth II.
That's why they don't have a president.
So so is Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister.
Prime Minister.
For all intents and purposes, Canada is an independent, sovereign country. But there are these. I mean, if you ever go to why is the Queen on their money, right? Why on the coins, or whether it's the $20?
And I think that's
Canadian
very
bill.
interesting because when my girlfriend traveled to Canada, one of the first things that caught her eye was that the Queen of England was on the money, and she's like, "Why?" But this is the explanation,
and
right?
I mean, and I think most Canadians you would talk to don't really think about the Queen at all, and it's not. And I mean, it is, I think, still largely a. I mean, it's largely a technicality at this point in history, from what I understand.
But is there something?
But I'm not immersed in the political structure of Canada, although I did live there for a few years.
Yeah.
So
that would be very interesting to see how much of a technicality it is, or if it's something else. Yeah, that would be very, very interesting to know, right? And interesting facts about Canada.
Yeah, some interesting facts about Canada is that it's the second largest country in the world after Russia.
In area, right?
In area, after Russia. Something really cool is that the national sport is hockey and lacrosse, which I don't know what it is.
Lacrosse?
It's like polo, right?
You have
these things like bats, but
it's more like a. How do you describe it? It's a stick,
like a club,
but it has like a basket on the end, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you think about hockey, right? You have a puck and it's on the ice, and you have your stick to control the puck and to pass it and everything. So think of it kind of as like hockey in the air, right? So there's a stick with a basket on the end, and you catch the ball in the basket and you pass it to your teammate, and you run up and down the field, either trying to defend or to bring the ball to the other end of the field to score a goal on a net, which is, like, again, sort of like roughly equivalent to a net on like a hockey rink, right? Slightly larger, right? And so you're running on a field and playing standing.
Yeah, hockey's a very big thing there, right? And also in some states in the north of the U.S., for example, I remember in Michigan, Matt would always watch, my host's father would always watch hockey. Yeah. He loved it. And he would go for the Red Wings. And I think that's...
hockey's a lot of fun to watch.
It's violent.
It can be very violent.
Like, I the thing I remember is that I was very amazed to see that sport had permitted fighting.
Yeah.
Like they could fight, and even the referee just gets there and it's part of it, like it's not prohibited. You get a punishment,
sure.
But it's part of it.
That's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's insane.
It's fun. It's a lot of fun.
They really punch themselves, and
you do not get to fight in lacrosse.
Okay.
Okay. I played lacrosse in high school, and I did try to fight a guy, and I got kicked out of the game.
Wow, but the violence.
You'd never expect that, right? But that was ages ago in a different life. But an interesting thing to mention about lacrosse is that it's derived from a Native North American game. Not quite the juego de pelota from the Mesoamericans, but it is an indigenous game from North America.
Okay, so another important and interesting thing about Canada is that the coldest temperature on record in Canada is less than 63 degrees.
Minus 63. Can you imagine that?
Yeah, and then imagine the wind on top of that.
Yeah, the wind chill, right? It's called wind chill.
But and it's we think of Canada as I mean, it's a big country, as you mentioned, right? But the population is very small. right?
Yeah.
And because I mean, some of those temperatures, right? You go further north, and you're
Gets crazier.
yeah, and they're very sparsely populated, and the vast majority of the population lives within, I think it's about 100 kilometers of
The United
the
States.
United States border.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a very funny movie that called Canadian Bacon that makes fun of that. If people remember, the Canadian actor John Candy.
John Candy.
It was one of his last movies. And but the largeness of it, right? There are some huge national parks. Right, that are
that's one of the things they're famous for, and they're biggest cities and are very close to the United States, as you mentioned, because of the weather. Because I cannot imagine us as Mexicans on a temperature of minus 63. I think the coldest I've been to is like minus 30 approx. Yeah, and Michigan as well, but minus 63, I would be probably dead by now.
Insane.
yeah. What about you, Nathaniel? What's the coldest you've been to?
Oh, geez, see, I don't remember. So I did live before Mexico, I lived in Philadelphia. And before Philadelphia, I lived in Montreal, which is just north of Vermont, where I'm originally from. And I seem to remember, on the radio, I remember certain days you would wake up, you'd listen to the weather, and you'd hear the weather report, and they'd say, don't leave your house for more than 5 minutes with exposed skin. Wear gloves and a hat and a face mask, because if you're outside for more than 5 minutes with exposed skin, you are liable to get frostbite. And so those would be very cold temperatures, and the wind,
like minus
the wind
one.
chill. So, I mean, I remember days of minus 40. Because the reason I remember minus 40 is because that's where, and they diverge again after that, but where Fahrenheit and Celsius are the same. They're at minus 40, Fahrenheit is equal to minus 40 centigrade. It was, but it was fun. I love the cold. I love the snow.
I love the cold, yes, but I don't
not
think if I can take that. Yeah. And now let's go with the misconceptions and stereotypes we have about Canadians. I love these parts because some of them turn out to be true. Some of them, of course, aren't, right? Like, we've been discussing many other stereotypes in this program, like the French, the Mexicans, Brazilians, etc. So one of the things I love, it's because, well, my first come in contact with the stereotype of what Canadians were like was South Park.
Of course.
This very stupid TV show who portrays Canadians as these drawings who just open their mouths like this. And I thought that was hilarious, but I never knew why would they do that. And it's just funny. It's just, probably like we make fun of Spanish people, like how they speak, and probably how other cultures make fun of us Mexicans. And it's just part of it,
Sure. I mean, it can be more or less offensive. It can be,
depending on
on the context and
South
the way
Park
in which
just
it's done.
Made me laugh because of that.
It's so over the top, that program.
Yeah, it's so over the top. And there's this thing about Canadians apologizing for everything. They're famous for apologizing for everything, and this turns out to be true because in 2016 they were reported by Internations as one of the nicest and friendliest countries in the world because people tend to say sorry a lot.
Well, I think it signifies that people are maybe a bit more aware of their social manners and how to get along in
I
the
remember
public
I asked
sphere.
a Canadian I met like a year ago. I asked her is this true? Do people in Canada really apologize for everything? And her answer was very interesting. She said that it was not just the sorry, but it was just like our way in Spanish, or like the in English, or no. It's just like a filler in the conversation. It's becoming more like that. It's just now part of it. Like say la 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 sorry, and that was very interesting because I thought, okay, we all have those fillers like in every language, every culture. And theirs is sorry. So yeah, it's probably also the combination of the being aware of your surroundings and the people you are spending time with, right? I think that's also interesting. Another thing I've heard from many Mexicans, probably they heard it somewhere, like myself, and believed it at the beginning, is that Canada has free healthcare for everyone. And this is not true. Especially if you're a visitor, if you go there, you have no coverage at all.
It's a state system.
Yes, you have to get your an insurance before you travel to Canada. And that was an experience. I remember Nelly didn't have a shot, and paying for that was very expensive there. And there's no free healthcare. That's
well, it's for within if you are a Canadian citizen, right? They're
yes,
not,
but you know, like many Mexicans believe. I've heard with
really?
conversing
Okay.
with people, like like talking to them.
Okay.
They say, "Oh yeah, Canada has free healthcare."
Okay, so to fly to Canada to get some free operation and then to come back to Mexico.
And
or
even on
something.
the internet,
Okay.
like I follow this webpage where many people comment on different things about the world, and they believe. I remember a picture of a guy who broke his arm, and if I were in Canada, I would get it fixed for free. And
Right, I think. I mean, it's all calculated based upon socio or economic status and income, and there is certainly. I mean, there are certainly. It's a complicated issue, but
so if you're planning on going, just
get
remember
an
it's not. Yeah, get an insurance. Also, maple syrup, right? Syrup or syrup?
Syrup.
Maple syrup is super famous. Canada produces more than 80% of the maple syrup around the world, and they love it. That's true. They totally love it.
And that's the thing. You can. I mean, I'm from Vermont, which is right on the Quebec border, in the eastern part of, just south of the eastern part of Canada. And Vermont is also famous for its maple syrup. But so too is New Hampshire and some other places in the northeastern United States where there are a lot of maple trees and maple farms to get the syrup. But people are also can be very proud of their local maple. Because I'm from Vermont, and I love maple syrup. But I would never Canadian maple syrup. No. Vermont maple syrup is much better.
Okay, that's more like pride thing, right?
Exactly.
Like local production.
But it is. I mean, it is. If people have never tried maple syrup, it is one of the best things in the world.
Yeah. Well, I have a can in my house.
That's good.
That's
good.
From Canada. So
Perfect.
Yes.
Canadian maple syrup. I mean, if that's all you can get, it'll suffice.
What can you eat it with?
Oh, you put it on pancakes. You put it on waffles. You put it on sort of pastry type things. But you can also put it. One very nice thing to do with maple syrup is to put it on vanilla ice cream. So instead of like chocolate sauce, drizzle a little maple syrup. A lot of people use it in various cooking recipes, and it gives it'll sweeten a dish, but also give it a particular maple flavor. One thing that I always use, that I still love to do, and I learned from my grandfather, when you eat a grapefruit, torona, right? You eat a grapefruit, you cut it in half, and then you eat the pieces out of it. But to drizzle some maple syrup on that, because you have the sweet and it mixes with the tartness of the grapefruit. Oh, it's incredible.
Oh, wow. I would have never mixed those if I had.
No, well, see, if you come from a place where maple, I mean, you find ways to. And one very popular thing is sugar on snow, right? So you boil the maple syrup, you get it warm again, and it has this very sticky consistency. And then you pour it over. You go outside in the snow, and you get like a dish full of snow. And you pour that heated up maple syrup on the snow, and because of the chemical reaction, the hot and the cold and everything, it sort of snaps into almost like a hard candy. Or it's very, very. I mean,
chewy.
Yeah, well, not chewy, but it'll stick to your teeth, and you feel like, oh, my teeth are gonna pull out because it's so sticky. But you eat this. It's kind of like a snow cone.
Is it good?
Yeah, I mean, it's snow, and so it's basically ice with maple
it's
syrup.
Like our
it's like of
the raspado, right? But just very
but instead of using the
ice,
the ice and the sugar flavored syrup, you use snow and you use maple syrup.
Nice. Wow. I thought it was only for bread or something.
Yeah, I always imagined it only for pancakes.
You can put it on anything. Trust me. Trust me.
Can you put it on your French fries?
It depends. That depends.
Because I've read somewhere that Canadians like to put something sweet on top of the French fries, but I don't know how true that is.
Well, there's a very famous thing in Quebec, which is called poutine, and that is French fries with cheese curd and then gravy.
Oh,
and so that's a very good hearty winter sort of like keeps you warm and healthy in the winter time.
Nice. We can totally see that you grew up very close to Canada.
Yes. Well, and when I lived there, it was home, and I sometimes I still miss it. But where I lived in Montreal, they actually had Quebec they had another holiday
Exactly.
a week
That's
before
what I was
Canada
gonna ask
Day.
you. Like,
Yeah.
what's the difference between Canada Day and Saint Jean Baptiste?
So Saint Jean Baptiste is originally the Fête de la Saint Jean Baptiste, or Fête nationale du Québec. Pardon my French, the little bit of French that I speak I learned in Quebec. So I'm sure some Parisian types would be offended by my pronunciation, but it's originally the Nativity of Saint John the Baptist, right?
Yep.
And French colonists brought it to Quebec, and over a long period of time, I mean, it's roughly a midsummer celebration, like we talked about a couple weeks ago. Midsummer in Scandinavia and Sweden and such. So it's essentially a midsummer celebration on the church calendar, the calendar of the Catholic Church. But it slowly, in the province of Quebec, slowly became secularized and identified more with French or Quebec nationalism, right? So the history of Quebec being a French colony, what I commented is known as Lower Canada during the colonial era. So the idea it was that it had this French heritage because of Catholicism, and became slowly adopted into symbolic of the Quebec nationalist identity, heavily, and especially during the 60s and the 70s, the era, the so-called Quiet Revolution, when this identity really concretized itself and became manifest.
So it's totally secular now.
Yeah, I mean, some churches obviously still do celebrate it because the date doesn't change. It's still the Nativity of Saint John the Baptist.
Okay. But it has also become this representation.
And now it is officially a Quebec holiday, and they call it a national holiday.
Do the other parts of Canada celebrate this?
No,
No.
no,
Okay.
no. And so there. I mean, so from the 60s and 70s, that manifestation of Quebec identity or Quebecois identity. A lot of tensions are still left over from that between Anglo-Canada and French-Canada. I would imagine the French-Canadian diaspora, which exists in the Northeast United States, but also, I mean, from Quebec, but also there are populations in the Great Plains of Canada, some of the prairie provinces, right? And so there are populations out there that I would imagine celebrate Saint Jean Baptiste. But it's very big in Quebec City, very big in Montreal, and it is a public and so-called national holiday of Quebec, even though obviously Quebec is not its own nation.
Exactly.
Right? It is a nation insofar as
within, right?
right. It's a ethnic identity or however you want to say heritage identity rather than a
just like it's a very I'm extrapolating a lot, but it's like Chipilo in Puebla.
I'm not aware of that.
It's an Italian colony that
Okay.
and they live here and they keep many of their traditions and they even keep their language, which is a miracle. Because usually when those kind of migrations happen, those languages are doomed to disappear, right? Because people will blend in with the community that speaks Spanish, and the same there, right?
Yeah.
Like they've kept these French.
And Quebec has some very strict language laws, and maintaining bilingualism on all public signs and documents. And all that sort
I
of
think
thing.
I was reading something about that, which many people would never start thinking about it, but I was reading how much money the government of Canada invested in having all these things bilingual, because all boxes, all papers, everything have to be in both languages because they're very strict in their policy, bilingual policy. So how much money the government has to spend on that? And I was like, wow, you would never think of that, right? Like a box with two languages, like that's.
But it's amazing, isn't it? You preserve both languages.
Yeah, and that's really what it is about, is preserving culture. But these tensions, and I was just reminded, I saw a snapshot on Instagram the other day. These tensions remain, right? So Canada Day, the 1st of July, 24th of June is Saint Jean Baptiste. And I saw a sign, a dépanneur in Montreal, a corner store in Montreal, that had a sign on the door saying, "We will be closed on Saint Jean Baptiste, June 24th, but we will be open on July 1st." Because Canada Day, whatever. We're Quebecois, right?
Exactly.
And so there is this sort of and that people would say, oh, but it costs so much money. Who cares about having bilingual? Everybody just, and most Quebecers are bilingual and can speak English as well. So what does it matter? Just put everything in it. But again, it's about heritage. And so the feeling that you might be left out or that your culture might not be appreciated.
And I think that's what makes another things of what makes Canada so interesting, right? Because of this diversity they have. And I think, we've talked about this a lot. Canada, United States, a lot of celebrations. Yeah. Remember, if you're planning to go to Canada, get an insurance. And they don't speak like this in South Park.
No, they're fully human individuals.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much for being with us another week. And, we'll see you next week.
Happy belated Canada Day. Happy July 4th.
Happy July 4th, yes. And we'll see you in a week.